Correct. I'm Carol Fowler, a member of the Chats with Champions Committee. I welcome you all this afternoon. And may we ask that you turn off any electronic devices. The Chats Committee is very pleased to welcome you to our first Wine Chats. This is a group effort. We have with us author and wine expert, Layne Witherell. I was going to say Layne Witherell.
It's happened before.
And also with us, the Damariscotta River Grill's wine guru and wine manager, Sharon Hobson. There she is. Also a selection of wines from Weatherbird. Layne is going to speak about his book, Wine Maniacs, Life in the Biz, in the Wine Biz, which is available for $15, and he'll be glad to autograph those books for you after the program. Layne has worn many hats in the biz: winery CEO, wine journalist, retailer, wholesaler, competition judge, exporter, importer, radio talk show host, and wine educator. Wine Maniacs was on the top 100 best-selling books list at Longfellow Books in Portland last year. His delightful book is an enthusiastic romp through his 35 years of all the good and bad that the business has to offer. If you appreciate wine, this is a humorous, easy-to-read, jargon-free book to own. Sharon Hobson has been the wine director for Damariscotta River Grill and Anchor Inn for nearly 6 years. She has an advanced degree from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. In addition to designing wine lists for both restaurants and performing ongoing staff education and tastings, Sharon is well known for overseeing the grill's wildly successful and lively wine club dinners and the more intimate dinners with the wine director. She believes there is no substitute for experiencing wine firsthand. And those of you who wish to taste will be invited to taste some delicious wines after Layne speaks. Layne and Sharon will discuss the selections and the wine's features, and you'll be able to ask questions or weigh in with your opinions. The chat series is sponsored by The First, here in Damariscotta, a community bank chartered in the mid-1800s. It actually serves customers at 16 locations along the coast of Maine. And now, here's Layne.
Another hat that I've worn, and it isn't in the book, I don't have a bibliography, but you'll notice it when you read it, it's peppered with books. I'm a book collector. I've been a wine book collector for 25, 30 years. I've owned and read over 1,000 wine books. I'm a fanatic wine book collector. I sold the first collection I put together to a library in Northern Virginia. 50 boxes of wine books. And among those 50 boxes was a PhD thesis in the making of Virginia wine for somebody if you want to go there. I've now started to bring that library back a book at a time. So I've got about 500 of those 1,000 books now. The two books that influenced me most and said, Layne, you got to write a book, was Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. I was struck by lightning when I read that book. So this is me. This is me in the wine business. This guy has got it. And the other one is a book called Anatomy of the Wine Trade by a British writer by the name of Simon Loftus. And it's a no-holds-barred, out-of-print little book written in the 80s about the way that the wine business was. I said, I better put all this together in 2 covers. Because if I don't, a lot of this is going to be gone. This is going to be a famous book in the next 10 to 20 years. Because these people, many of them, aren't around anymore. And the adventures and the thoughts aren't around. It's a romp. The best quote to describe it is, what's lacking is in humorous or witty, or is humorous or witty or caustic writing about wine. Writing powered by gonzo irreverence. This was the Wine Journalists Conference in 2013. So we're going to take a look at a little gonzo irreverence, folks. I don't read wine blogs, that delicious form of irresistible propaganda that shows up on your computer, phone, emails, and doorstep. They are usually tired, uninformed, and predictable. Although, bloggers are doing their damnedest to somehow fantasize their way into the real wine biz, holding their virtual glasses just so while reciting the obligatory mantras on the wine du jour's bouquets, oh so special toasted oak, those notes of beets and hint of road tar and the rest of those lies that emerge from their teeming little minds. We're going to take a fun ride for 219 pages. I've taken the wine biz and I've distilled it down to 4 personality types that I've known and met and encountered and enjoyed and loved and hated for 35 years. The wine maniac. This is what all those wannabes strive to become, a living, breathing vintage chart. Wine maniacs are constantly in search of every new and obscure wine along with its descriptor of the moment. They try to stay one step ahead of that soon-to-become rare bottle that has recently been hyped by the press, or what's worse, the completely overhyped and irresistible vintage of the century. Yes. The amateur. This is usually a winery owner. They are the wine maniac cubed and have piles of money made by doing something else. The old truism is that they need those extra millions when their wine venture goes belly up, and it usually does. They are a great adventure for a serious student of the subject, and they're an easy person to spot and fun to watch during their ascent and descent. The nepotist. Usually small family-owned businesses breed that peculiar trait called nepotism. The wine biz is a continual breeding ground for this type. Watch for Junior spending his entire career being a mindless nuisance, usually at your expense. If you're thinking about joining Wine Mania, then you will no doubt encounter one of these types, unfortunately as your boss. I have a new category that I did not put in here, that I just came up with, which is the faux nepotist. And we'll be talking about the faux nepotist a little later. This is the person who sold their winery, small winery, to a gigantic winery and has dressed up the person with their name as the person who owned the little winery. And these are starting to abound, and I have a couple of delicious favorites. The guru. A form of wine saint that every maniac aspires to become and very few succeed. This is a person enthralled in a lifetime of tasting and seriously thinking about the stuff. Just put on your saffron robe, sit down and shut up and take a good set of notes. Welcome to the wine biz. I started getting interested in wine in the 70s at San Francisco State University. It was an interesting time because wine was just emerging and we were drinking mostly French in California. Who knew? There wasn't much to know. There were about 6 wine books. We saw the biz changing, my friends and I, because the deliberate peasants, the people who made Zinfandel, it was aged 10 years and sold it to you for $2.50, were rapidly disappearing. And so we went on the road to find them, and there's a whole chapter here on California wine in search of the deliberate peasants. Frank Nervo, August Sebastiani, these people who are now long gone from the wine biz. You almost have to go to Europe into little villages to find these people. And they were around in abundance, and they were what really kept California wine going. I guess the moment in time for me when I decided to go into the biz was July the 4th, 1976. And I went out to dinner at Ben Johnson's Steakhouse. My usual bottle of Bordeaux wasn't there on the list. But another bottle of wine was. Stag's Leap, 1973, Cabernet Sauvignon. And I told my partner, my companion, God, it's the best bottle of wine I've ever tasted in my life. And she said, the quote was delicious, she said, "You always say that, Layne." Well, the next day, it won the Paris tasting. Wow. that was the bottle of wine. I paid about $10 for it at the restaurant. Warren Radowski never had to sell another bottle of wine in his life. I wound up judging a couple of competitions with him, and people would, big ego wine judges, big ego, he couldn't fit him in that door. And when Warren Radowski would walk in on all fours, Warren, what do you think of that? How's that wine, Warren? Yeah. The banner in the San Francisco Chronicle, New York Times was the Judgment of Paris. And that was the banner, and it was. Having that Time magazine writer there and having Stag's Leap doing the French, that bottle of wine is now in the Smithsonian. They did the official, here it is. It was that day I decided to go into the biz. San Francisco was getting a little expensive, bless their little hearts, I know. So I moved to Oregon. Oregon, Portland, Oregon, 1979, who knew? Portland, Oregon, 1979 was a light blue collar town. I got a job as a sales rep, and then later, about a year later, I got a position as a sales manager for an Oregon winery. And they let me have one of the votes and how their wine was made, which was awesome. There were 3 of us. The winery's open, all it's still around, so we'd sit there and we'd taste stuff and blend stuff. And it was pretty much the filbert nut versus the Pinot Noir at that point. And also it was out-of-state Riesling versus Oregon wine, because there weren't any laws. So a guy named Charles Corey wanted to bring an ocean of Washington State wine into Oregon. Dave Adelsheim, brilliant, still around, still making great wines. Said, no, it needs to say Oregon on that label. We need to protect that. This is all we've got. And he enacted the earliest wine laws in the United States that protected a place. Brilliant work. Here's Portland, Oregon in 1976. What I had to work with was fairly backward compared to San Francisco. Portland in the late 70s was still light blue collar as the high-tech industry began making inroads. Given the rapidly expanding burbs, real estate agents and developers could manage to kill the occasional $200 bottle of Chateau Lafite with their salad course and feel little economic pain. The ethereal, delicate fruit of the wine would be immediately paralyzed by the vinaigrette salad dressing. What the hell? A little glassful to celebrate the building of the latest strip mall. Welcome to Portland, Oregon. They're not quite doing that now. Adelsheim really was an enduring character because not only of the way that he made his Pinot Noirs, but his vision of Pinot Noir. He had a vision of Oregon becoming Burgundy. And he brought in the right barrels, he brought in the right clones from France. He did everything that you were supposed to do in terms of the wine. And he and Dave Blatt from Winery and a number of people, Elk Cove, you had Elk Cove on your list, I knew them, and they were working on getting the right clones, Pinot Noir clones from Burgundy. So everybody was really notching it up. The name that they called themselves was Dirtbag Idealists. That's who they were. That's what they were. I don't think they're any dirtbag idealists now in Oregon anymore because of the millions of dollars being brought in. Worked for a wholesaler, wrote top wine list in the world, Sour Sham Lodge. Wrote the Benson Hotel, #2 wine list in the world. Studied my wines. Started my own company mid-80s. It was time because the dollar was extremely strong. I mean, the dollar was a magnet. So I went over to Europe, brought a whole suitcase full of books. A little bit of clothes, suitcase full of books. Didn't really need them. I've been studying this stuff. Bordeaux was king in the 80s, but I got together with a couple of really brilliant British people, and we traveled all over France. And we found the southern part of France, the Vendée region, was a new region, just brought into law by the French government. It was the worst wine producing area on the planet, outside of parts of southern Italy. And we discovered these wines. We traveled around in our little cars, funny little cars, and we went everywhere in France. It was a fascinating time till the dollar changed and fell on its nose. But it was not only a way to see French wines up close, but to see changes of the way that the world was undergoing winemaking. And Bordeaux was king, and they were changing. The southern French wines were changing. So I sold my company and decided to head to Virginia. That was interesting. Virginia wine was, let's see, it's hard. Somebody asked me at a tasting that I did, what do you think of Virginia wine? I haven't read this chapter. Some of it's good and some of it's not so good. The chapter is called Virginia Wine, Form versus Substance. One of the things that they didn't do in Virginia was adopt the Oregon laws. So you can bring things in from out of state. A winery like Chateau Morissette, and I don't say it in the book, I didn't have the nerve to do it, but in Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson's 7th edition of the Wine Atlas, they say it, so I might as well quote them. One winery, 60,000 cases in Virginia. That's a little strange. I don't think you can grow that much fruit. Archie Smith and I were the two people who tried. I ran a winery. We were the two people who tried to make it happen. My guiding guru for this adventure was a wildly eccentric Archie Smith III from Meredith Winery. Meredith had bounced back and forth over the years, producing award-winning wines one moment and peculiar stuff the next. Archie must have been Keith Richards' twin, separated at birth. He had classic 60s black, curly, disheveled, and devilishly long hair jutting out in all directions, which he accessorized with a decades-old Levi's shirt and pants that hung from his frame like those on a scarecrow. He smoked slowly and thoughtfully through the lungs of a lifetime smoker. I had heard that Archie came back from academia to run the family winery. Well, he did. Archie was a PhD at the University of Virginia in philosophy. He went to Oxford and got a PhD in philosophy. The first thing that Archie and I did was to go before the Virginia wine wholesalers. And they asked Archie, what's your philosophy? He said, my philosophy is that you sell my wine. This was the late 80s, and it was very difficult to sell those Virginia wines. They have since gotten better. There are wineries there that are fabulous, but I still think you can drive a truck through the laws in this state. And I say it in this book. Somebody's got to say, guys, no more out-of-state juice. You've got to tighten these laws up. The next thing was the gigantic wine distributor. Montauk, Maine was a fascinating winery, and the chapter includes people like John Kluge, Donald Trump, Patricia Kluge, probably the saddest amateur story in the history of wine. How you can take $150 million and bye-bye. The economy went down, her dream went down, the winery went out of business, and Donald Trump came in and scooped it up. And that's in this chapter. I don't know what to make of all that, whether it's a great thing, a bad thing. There are a lot of amateurs there and a lot of people trying. A lot of people do great work there. I looked up a winemaker who was my assistant when I taught the wine class at the University of Virginia. She said at the time, I'm going to UC Davis. She did. She worked for Fably in Burgundy, and she's now running Blenheim, which is Dave Matthews' winery in Charlottesville. So there are great little success stories there. They're fabulous. Barbersville is fabulous, but you really got to zero in on those success stories. That's the hard thing about the place. I went to work for the gigantic wine distributor, because I had a background in fine wines. And that was fascinating because of one thing. And one thing was the event right alongside the Paris tasting was the 60 Minutes piece on wine and health. The 60 Minutes piece on wine and health totally revolutionized wine in America. I was sitting Sunday night watching 60 Minutes, and friends I had had in the business for 20 years had tried to write about wine and health and couldn't, because you didn't do that. So Morley Safer goes on and says, oh, there's this French study, and they say that you can drink wine and you'll be okay, you'll be better. And the next day, I went into my office, gigantic wine distributor, and got in about 8 o'clock in the morning. There wasn't a single case of red wine left in the warehouse. It's got huge. This warehouse is as big as Damariscotta. It's like, it's gone. What happened? That's it. That was the day. So all of a sudden it became okay to drink red wine in America. Who knew? One of the trends that's going on right now in wine, and it was starting then, and it's continuing today, and you're going to see it every time you go to a store, is the chapter called What You Thought You Bought. What you thought you bought is the large winery buying the small winery and keeping the brand and changing the mix a little bit. So my favorite of all time, this is McMurray Ranch. McMurray Ranch is a little Sonoma operation. Fred McMurray, I don't think he ever had a winery, but he grew grapes. Kate McMurray's daughter is dressed up as the faux nepotist. And she's, hi, McMurray Ranch, here I am. Owned by Ernest and Julio Gallo. It is what it is. Page 89. What you thought you bought. All the multinationals that own the companies that you see, that you think. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but the word that I went and researched that shows you how all of that works when you think you're buying a small winery is Juggernaut. And I looked it up. Juggernaut was a Hindu festival where you had a cart, a large cart, and a Hindu temple on top of the large cart. And it had wheels, and the oxen were pulling it. And it broke loose from the oxen, and it went down the hill, and it killed 4 or 5 people. And that's a juggernaut. So that means that you can buy McMurray Ranch wine anywhere on the planet, because I work for a Gallo distributor. There's a chapter in here on Montana with Gallo. I don't have any bones to pick with them. I just know how well they do what they do. And they get that stuff out there. And they dress Kate up like Miss McMurray. Hi, Miss McMurray. It's nice to see you. How are you? Every time you go see a brand, every time you go buy something, you need to Google it up and see. You know, have you enlarged the area that you're growing your grapes or buying your grapes? They're all here, and it's happening on a daily basis. You don't have to run out and buy the little tiny guys for $480 a bottle. You can do that if you want, that's fine, there's no problem there. But you do have to be diligent in keeping your eyes in terms of what's out there, the wines that you are buying, and they change on an hourly basis. These wineries are scooping stuff up, and that's it. That's the way it is. I went on to write for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Style Weekly, the Portland Phoenix. It's a whole different thing. When you write, if you get really lucky in writing, something lands on your desk. And the best thing that landed on my desk, there are three best things. There was an interview with Kate Bread, interview with Angelo Gaia, the greatest living Italian winemaker, and there was an interview with Robert Mondavi. I studied Mondavi my whole life. I had a 1 hour one-on-one with Mr. Mondavi, and I got to ask him the kind of questions I wanted to ask him. You know, why isn't America a wine-drinking nation? Huh? What happened there? You know, why can't I go into a KFC and have a glass of wine like you can in France? And he said, and I quote, "I never had the nerve." I guess he was old enough to be able to say those things. I'm old enough to be able to write those things. He said, "We never had the nerve. We just had that wine and health thing. It was always looking over our shoulder at us. And we did as well as we could with expanding wine, but we had to stop at a certain point. We never became Europe. We never became a wine-drinking nation the way that Europe is." There's a chapter on shipping. I'm sure that you've all heard about that. There's a chapter on restaurants, which is fun. But the conclusion is this: you've got to taste everything. Write them all down. Keep your little book. Everything that you taste, record. Every single wine you taste, because there are too many of them. And I like to carry my little phone, and I like to Google everything up. I was having lunch for a restaurant today, saw one on the list that I didn't know, Googled it up. That's the way you're going to do it. So there you have it, a life in wine mania. If there is a moral to this strange little adventure, it is don't be afraid to go out and try something new. Buy a wine book or two, take a class, read a good wine magazine, record the wines you taste, find a guru, lay some wines down for Tuesday night and some for when you can tell your own set of wine mania stories. Thank you.
Now, many of us have found our wine guru locally.
Yeah.
So
He's leaving.
she's going to pour some wines so that we may taste 3 different wines. And they both, Sharon and Layne will respond to those, but so will you. And you'll be able to come up and have your wine in just a moment. Any questions for Layne in the meantime?
Fire away.
I was wondering your notion. I noticed in Europe there's a lot of interest in grappas. And when you're in Italy, you could go into a grocery store and buy a Pinot grappa or a Chardonnay grappa. Here you can hardly find grappas, and when you do, it's sold as grappa. I was just curious.
Today's, one of the things that I do every Wednesday when I wake up, okay, religiously, is I read the New York Times wine section. That's religious experience. Coffee, New York Times wine section. And he talks about the laws of the 50 different countries called America. And they're totally different. Some places you can buy grappa just like that. Some places you cannot. And Maine is one of those places. It's California. When Prohibition ended, what happened was the states that were the producers, California being the biggest, enacted by far the most liberal set of laws. We grow it, we make it, we sell it, you can drink it, do what you can buy every grappa in the world. DC, the other place. Washington, DC, very cosmopolitan. We got people from everywhere. New York, the same way. So the problem with finding these, and that article today by the wine writer in the New York Times is a fabulous piece because he addresses that issue. It's state by state. And that's the problem.
So there are other states where you could go and find a selection of grappa akin to what you would find in Italy.
Read the New York Times
Today?
Today,
Okay.
and you'll get right to the heart of the matter. You will get right to the heart. He zeroes right in on it. Oh, thank you. Yeah, he is. That's the biggest. Because I've been in a variety of states in the business. Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, traveled all over, and the laws are all the way they are. They tried shipping. Shipping is kind of ho-hum. I have a whole scathing chapter on shipping. Scathing. It's not anti-shipping, it's just anti the stupidity of shipping, of how that works. The gigantic wine distributor is the gigantic wine distributor. They have, they have control. Some states just don't like the stuff. Now, there are consumer groups that rank states by whether you like it or not. In Pennsylvania, you can't buy wine or spirits in a grocery store. But you can bring your own wine into a restaurant, and they will charge you a little money. So the problem is we are 50 countries. We aren't 50 states. That's why there are a lot of reasons why we would say yes.
When you discuss the consumption quantity of Europe against the United States, they had thousands of years to develop a climate that produced wines way before our wagon train guys decided to do it. So we're like little babies back there.
We're babies, but the thing that's happening right now is we're climbing up the ladder. Italy and France are climbing down the ladder.
Right.
And they're becoming us.
Right.
You know, in Italy and France, you go out, you have a half-hour lunch instead of a 2-hour lunch,
Exactly.
and you run back to the office, and you work, and you're an American.
Right.
Whereas we are going out to dinner. My wife and I have a bottle of wine every night for dinner. And I call her and say, what do you think? What's going on for dinner? Hey, this. We go out 2 or 3 times a week. We are Europeans, but they are on this frantic little treadmill called let's be Americans. You know, let's all have heart attacks when we're 45. But I think at the end of the day, I think what makes us great is that we've never let anything slow us down as a country. When I remember the day after Warren Winowski knocked off the French in that event, and it sent an absolute, it was like a lightning bolt through California and the wines. It became a competitive sport to make wine in California. You weren't just hanging out, gee, I think I'll make a Cabernet or Chardonnay, this is fun. No, it was, God, now we're all gonna do it. So that's, I think, the difference between us. The Europeans are, they're becoming us. Scary, yes.
When you were talking about Gallo and that
Oh, yeah.
Montana and stuff, you're saying that in Oregon, they protected their wine because they put a label on it. They said this is, so that if it had Oregon on it, it means that the wine was grown there,
Right.
produced there.
Right.
But you're saying that Gallo buys up other wineries around
They
the
buy up
United States?
wineries, but if they bought a winery in Oregon, they wouldn't change those laws.
Okay.
What these guys are doing is they're buying a winery, say in California, and that's not just them. I don't want to say they're totally the bad guys. But I have Constellation, which is maybe in play, maybe not in play. The big tobacco company may buy them. But let's look at Constellation buying Robert Mondavi. They bought Robert Mondavi. So what they'll do is they'll look at, okay, he grows X number of acres in Napa. Well, we can go to every Cumberland Farms with a Robert Mondavi label, and we can go do a California appellation, which is perfectly legal, and we can go get grapes from Lodi and in the Central Valley and all over, and we can grow the brand. So this is about branding wines, not about schlepping stuff in from other places. The states that have done the really great controls like Europe, well, up in Niagara is one of those places in Canada. Boy, they've got European. There are no grapes that come from outside the area. One of the few places. Oregon's one of the others. I don't think does Washington let out-of-state grapes in? Is that do they have the law?
I don't think they have the law.
Yeah, but they probably wouldn't because there's a lot of
There's a whole lot of crossover. There's a gray area between Washington and Oregon that's happening now. So.
Oh, good.
Blended.
Oh no.
Well, it isn't all bad.
You're right. Well, if there are any questions, let's
Come on
take
up
some
and
wine.
I'll tell you a little bit about the wine you're going to be tasting. Come up and give